Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who likes to browse, but not to carouse.
Tim Longo.
had to get that in there at some point. I thought for sure that would be the intro last week, but when you were host, but no. No, we had not had. That is probably the line you hear the most, or see the most in this game.
Yeah,
from Tom Nook every time you go into his store.
No, I had to reference the gyroids. It was too. You're just becoming.
Man, my gyroids. I'm almost. I think I have a 16,000 Happy Academy whatever thing.
Oh, that's amazing!
Because of all the gyroids I have in there. Oh, and I have a UFO, so that's also good.
Nice. Oh, I haven't seen the UFO. I bought the asteroid yesterday, which is pretty cool because it's hovering and it spins.
Yeah,
so
that's what the UFO does that as well. It hovers and spins. It's very cool. You'd love it.
Yeah,
you'd like build your whole house around it. It'd be an X-Files thing.
Yeah.
We are, of course, talking about Animal Crossing and decorating our homes, not our actual homes, but our little virtual homes with weird space junk, apparently, and my gyroids. So welcome to our fourth and final week on the game proper. So we will both be hitting some topics and some takeaways. But the focus this week was on time travel, speaking of science fiction. Because we both wanted to move around a bit and see some of the seasons and the holidays. I saw fewer than you did, so why don't you give me your list? Then we can talk about why I didn't go to more, as well as the ones I did.
Okay, so the ones, let's see. I did the fishing tournament. I did the 4th of July, which is I think it's the 4th of July is actually celebrating. Because they don't, they try to generalize them.
Right. They don't want to call it the 4th of July. Yeah. They want to call it the summer celebration or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's celebrating the anniversary of the train station being built.
Oh.
I think it's something like that.
Uh-huh.
It's usually something, related to the town, of course. Let's see. Then I did I did the sports fair. I did Halloween. I did Toy Day, which is the 24th of December. That is not Christmas. I did cherry blossoms.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Because I actually had never
early
seen
April.
That. Yeah, I'd never seen that.
It's in the attract mode actually, but
oh, okay. I must have.
It's one of the ones that shows at the beginning.
Right. And I'm looking at my list, and I think I thought I forgot.
Which is a good way, by the way, to see like a number of outfits that you can get. Because it seems like it just pulls randomly. I think it procedurally generates that. I don't think they're movies. I think it's actually just literally playing a little bit of the game.
It does look like it because occasionally you'll see the character who's running around just like pushing through an animal,
right? Yeah,
and like moving them out of the way. Which I would hope would not.
They would not do that. Yeah, they would not do that in a movie.
They're like getting stuck and stuff. So
I realized finally, like at the number of times, because I normally put it on and then I'm just kind of getting set up, and so the attract mode is playing while I'm arranging my desk or whatever I do before I start streaming and checking to make sure everything's working, and then I'll see and I'll be like, oh, I haven't seen that hat before or that shirt or whatever or umbrella and at a certain point I just went, oh, this is literally different every time. So I finally, what are we? We're 4 weeks in, and I finally went, oh, it's always different.
Right.
So that was fun.
Right. The other thing that I did that isn't a holiday, but I didn't actually do for some reason throughout the rest of our play, I made sure I did some turnip stuff because I had both forgotten and just never sort of timed it right. I don't know why. I guess maybe.
How do you start the turnip stuff?
So
are there seeds or something that you have to buy?
No. So we definitely I forgot to mention that as a topic. We should have in pre-show.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I asked him at one point, like, because Tom Nook has I keep saying Tim
named Timmy. So
He does. But Tom Nook has a menu which is ask me about more stuff or something like that, and one of them is ask me about turnip prices. And I went in there and was like, oh, turnip prices. And he's like, I'll pay whatever. But that's a buy them at a certain time every week thing, right? Is that what it is?
So the way turnips are basically talk about like
their stock STALK market. Yes, I'm,
yeah,
I'm familiar with what's going on there.
I just think it's funny that, a game that in many ways is essentially about capitalism, they've even found a way to get the stock market in there, in a cute Animal Crossing appropriate way. So Joan, I think she's a boar, maybe like a pig or a boar.
Oh, don't say that. Don't say it. Oh.
Sorry, Joan.
You don't like her?
Joan's adorable. She's a great character. In every iteration, but she has tusks, so I think she's a boar essentially.
I see.
So she shows up, I think, on Sundays, and she's wandering around randomly. I don't know if she has a time frame because I don't remember what time I found her, but I think it's most of the day. It might be in a certain timing. And then you buy the turnips from her in lots of 10, 50, or 100, only in those increments. So you have to kind of commit to one of those. And then you can only sell them in those same lots in 10, however many you bought. So you kind of whatever. And they take up obviously inventory slots. So you kind of have to, well, you can drop it, I think, but you got to think it through a little bit. And then basically every day they expire after a week. So you have to sell them, before the next Sunday, basically before Saturday ends. And every day of the week starting on Monday after you bought them, the price fluctuates. Right. So you're basically it's a push your luck, right? It's like, oh, okay, Monday
maybe I can do better, right? Maybe I can turn a bigger profit. Yes, yeah.
But obviously it could also go down, and you could lose profit. So it's that usual thing of like, oh, okay, I can make 5 bells on each one, on Monday, but do I want to make more?
Right.
So that's all. It's basically a weekly rhythm, and she comes every Sunday, so you can buy more. So I just hadn't done that in a long time. So I just wanted to at least.
I had never done that. I did not know that was a thing. And when I found it in Nook's menu, I went, oh, I didn't know that was a thing in this game. Like in this iteration, I didn't know that it was there from the beginning. We kind of found that on stream, and somebody said, oh, I didn't know that either. Yeah,
it's not well advertised. I mean, I think occasionally the animals will talk about it, and there might have been a signpost or a bulletin board, something like that, where it kind of talks about it. And I think I'm wondering if another thing they do with the hint system is, using mail as well as the animals, is that if you haven't I would like to think they do this because I had an example that it's not coming to me and I didn't put a note down where I felt like this was happening, where, if you haven't engaged in a certain thing, the system or something in a certain amount of time, that they actually seed like, hey, let's send them an email about this. Like right. Red is another example, right? Like if Red maybe that's the example I'm thinking about for myself. For whatever reason, I was pretty sure he came on Tuesdays and Saturdays, but for whatever reason, I just never found his tent or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I didn't really see him until last week. So over the first, couple weeks, I just wasn't going to Red. And I feel like that everyone started talking about Red a lot more.
He must not have had a rock that you could, hit with your shovel or whatever nearby.
You're right. Yeah, exactly. I was just so focused on those rocks. I just walked right by him.
You had your routine.
I did. I found every day I found that darn thing. Because the way that rock thing works is you hit it, right? And as I said last week, it fades off. But if you hit all 4 times and you get the little Mario ding, the last bag is 1,000. So you get 100 per hit, which obviously is barely worth it. 100 bag of 100, but if you get the 4th one, you get 1,000. So
that's how that works. Okay,
so
I did that once, and I haven't been doing it every day, I don't think, but
it's just whatever. It's one of those. Yeah, it was just my routine,
just a thing to do. Yep,
it wasn't even the effort that you put
but
into
Red
it,
clearly did not have a rock near his
no,
head.
no. So I'm just wondering if, but I guess seeing that you didn't engage with the turnips and with Joan, and they didn't give you any hints about it, then my theory is probably wrong. But
I wouldn't be surprised with visitors if it might be a bigger thing, and that the stock market, because it has a potential for loss, I wonder if they don't want to foreground that as much. It seems...
yeah, it's
right.
especially for kids, like engaging in that. It's like
That's a weird. Yeah, you
that's a
don't.
little bit of a tricky one.
It's
We
not.
didn't even
It's never too young to talk to your children about finance, ladies and gentlemen.
yeah, right, about playing the stock market. Yeah, and that's one good thing Animal Crossing is teaching teaching the youth of the world, the risk reward of investment.
Don't worry, there's no risk. If you work on Wall Street, the government will bail you out.
Oh, yikes! Yuck. Um, but the other,
That's why turnips are appropriate. Good golly.
right? Yeah, that's pretty funny. I guess that was probably very intentional. The other example, other than Red, like they talk about Katrina, they talk about Wendell as well. Did you ever meet Wendell?
Oh no, I haven't.
So Wendell is a walrus who walks around, who is an artist, and he's adorable because he's like carrying all of his art supplies on him, like he's trekking through the wilderness or something. Like he's a mobile artist with his easel and and all that.
Right.
And if you he's hungry. And if you feed him, if you have fruit on you and you feed him fruit, or you give him fruit and he eats the fruit, he will give you a wallpaper. I think like a special wallpaper that you can only get from him. It's kind of like Red in a way, or Savannah, right? Is Savannah? No, not Savannah.
Sahara.
The camel. Sahara. Yeah, it's like the camel. Like, so she gives carpets, right? And he gives wallpaper.
Right.
So it's like the equivalent of that. But again, I hadn't seen him in a while, and the animals started talking about this strange guy who's wandering through the forest who looks really hungry, and they don't name him, I don't think, but it's like, who are they talking about? And then I did see him eventually.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah, I haven't run into him either. I have run into Gulliver and Sahara and Katrina and Red.
Yeah.
So I've run into all of those. But that's one I don't remember either from past play. I mean, I think that one of the things I think that happens is if you play at the same time,
yeah,
or basically if you play on a pretty regular schedule, I think you have a lot of opportunities to miss stuff as well. So that's a kind of weird thing. Let me do my holidays. We can get into that as well. I ended up only doing 3, and I did 4th of July as you did. I did Halloween as you did, although I also went back to October 30th because I wanted to check to see about the candy thing. If you don't have candy on Halloween and somebody asks you for it and you can't hand it over, they change your clothes to like patched clothing.
They do more than that.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
I didn't do it a lot because I don't have any candy and I don't have any interaction. So maybe we can dive into that more. Yeah. And I went to, I was going to go to Christmas, but then I don't know why, but I overshot and I went to New Year's Eve, and then I stopped at that point. New Year's Eve, if you go to the Wishing Well, the Auld Lang Syne is playing at midnight.
Nice.
And it just sits there and repeats. I'm sure for a while, but yeah, that was pretty cool. I was not, I didn't know what to expect for New Year's. I think my favorite was honestly the 4th of July or whatever, the train founding celebration day or whatever.
Pretty cool.
Because of the reflected fireworks in the lake is a delightful idea. Yeah. They don't have to change anything about what they do for the game, right? They just have to render these particles on a plane or however they do that. But fundamentally, I mean, that was just a joyous kind of moment of like, oh, I'm not going to be able to see the fireworks. And then I cozy up to the lake and suddenly there they are. And I was like, oh, that's really good. Yeah. That was a delight.
Buy a balloon?
I did not buy a balloon. I bought a pinwheel.
Huh. So yeah, I was looking for I thought you could buy a pinwheel, but Red wasn't selling me a pinwheel. Or did you get it from Red, or where'd you get it from?
I think it was, Red had a cart.
Yeah, he has
Red
a cart.
Yeah.
And he sold me balloons. I could pick my color, but I don't know, maybe I missed it.
I got a pinwheel and I got to pick my color, and I loved it because if you run around, it spins.
Yeah.
Like as you're running, it builds some momentum, and so then you'll stop and it'll just sit there and kind of spin next to your face or whatever. Oh, it was like being a kid. I mean, I can remember, being at the beach or something like that and getting a pinwheel for the 4th of July, and what a big deal that was. It's not so much anymore, but when I was young, we didn't have tons of money, and so those simple pleasures were really, a big deal at the time. I'm talking like single digits, like 4 or 5 type age, but I can remember it. I definitely remember it being a really neat thing, and me looking at that thing and figuring out, like, how does this thing, like, how does it turn? It's really wild.
Well, back in the 40s, that was when.
Yeah, right.
Some of the fancier sparklers were invented. So
yeah, it's good. Sparklers have been around a long time, my friend.
I couldn't.
Maybe talking like the 1440s.
Yeah.
Those have been around a long time in Asian cultures. Anyway, so I think that was actually my favorite. I didn't expect that. I expected it to be Halloween. But tell me some other of the tricks that they do, because I didn't have treats, so I didn't get treats. I got tricks.
Yeah, and so
or I got a trick, and then I was like, oh, I don't want any more of that.
So that's one of the things that they will do if you don't have candy, trick-wise. And essentially, right? Obviously, when your clothes get turned into patchwork, then you lose whatever you had on, right?
Right.
The other thing they do is the way I think it works, because I actually never found Jack. I looked for him, but I couldn't find him. So, and I assume you didn't either then.
No.
Or you don't know what I'm talking about.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
So Jack, so all of the animals, including Tortimer, are dressed like Jack, who is this other character that pops up on that day from a certain time to another time. I think it's like from 8 to like midnight or something. And he looks like they look like. So he has a jack-o'-lantern, looks exactly like them basically, but he does not run up to you. He's actually just kind of wandering around. So that's how you know it's him, kind of, is like if he's not chasing you down like the rest of the animals, then you're like, okay, that's Jack. If you talk to him, I forget, because I didn't find him. I forget exactly how it works. Like if you have to solve a riddle or something, he will give you in succession throughout the night, pieces of the spooky furniture set, which is essentially Halloween themed furniture set. And so you can get that from him by talking to him, but you have to, that's what it is. I remember. So when you talk to him once, he gives you a spooky set, and then he vanishes and teleports to some random place in the map. So you have to basically go re-find him. But of course, when you're doing that, you're running into the animals that look exactly like him. And you either better have candy or you're gonna, because the other thing they do other than the clothes thing is they will randomly turn anything in your inventory into a jack-o'-lantern or jack-in-the-box that are Halloween themed. So you can put those in your house, of course. They're kind of cool little items, but I had forgotten that. And I actually just had, I think Tortimer on Halloween gives you a custom, basically every holiday, if you go talk to him, he will give you a special item you can only get on that day. And usually it's one of the miniature town sets. So on Halloween, he gives you a miniature Katrina tent that you can put in your house. And I had that in my inventory, and I forgot about the trick part. And if they go and you don't have candy, they will turn anything in your inventory, anything, into a jack-o'-lantern or a jack-in-the-box, basically destroy it. So my Katrina tent was turned into a jack-o'-lantern. I don't even know if you can ever get it back. I had tickets in my inventory.
I mean, there's always next year, Tim.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, time travel, I guess that's possible. But, like I had tickets that were turned into, bugs were turned into jack-o'-lanterns because I didn't have any candy. I did the same thing you did. I just went straight to the date, and I forgot about the candy only being available, in the month before. And so basically my whole inventory, I should have just gone home, tried to get home without being accosted, and
right, and give me some candy.
Put the stuff in the house, which is what you should do. But I was just too lazy, and I knew this was our last session, so I wasn't too worried about losing some of those items. But so it's actually pretty cool and elaborate, and There's
That's my alert. That's my alert that, oh, this was the time I was going to come up and set up the recording we did earlier.
Huh, thank you for setting an alarm. So, but it's kind of neat, it's a little bit of a scavenger honey elaborate mini game kind of thing, and I thought it was, and of course with every holiday the music changes, and the Halloween music I thought was quite cool. And
yeah, it was very good. Yeah. And that's actually, I mean, when I was a kid, probably Halloween was my favorite holiday. Just because it was different, it was so different, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I had some terrifying encounters on Halloweens throughout the years when I was very little, but in general, it was my favorite holiday. I still like horror today, so I guess it didn't impact me too badly. Right? But yeah, I can definitely remember one time coming up to a house and there being a scarecrow and a chair in the front yard.
I see where this is
going. And it wasn't just a scarecrow. There was a man in there. And when you started going up to oh my God. And I was like 5 and I flipped out when he stood up. Oh my God. I almost died. I almost didn't make it to 6.
That's great.
I almost died at 5 years and 10 months.
Well, it's funny how the thing I like about Halloween in the game, for sort of similarly silly reasons, is the animals. Like, I don't think there's another time in the whole game, in the whole year, where the animals sort of turn against you in a way, because
right.
If you were to play longer than you did, literally every time you see an animal, they rush you,
They do. They run up to you. I noticed that. And that was when I was like, oh no, I don't know if I want this. I don't have anything for them.
Yeah.
And so I time traveled to the 30th and went, oh, but I'm not going to save. Right. So,
well, that's you mentioned that in pre-show. I don't know if anything bad happens if you save backwards. That's the irony of it. Is
I didn't save forwards. I reset every time I changed the flag.
Oh, okay. I saved every time.
And so the first time I did it, I was testing the GBA player connection, and I'll talk about that afterwards. Yeah. But and Mr. Resetti came up, and I had totally forgotten about that. If I ever saw it, like, I know it's a thing, right? And I knew that it was a thing, and I've heard the name Mr. Resetti, but I didn't remember seeing it. Yeah, it really was. I didn't remember seeing it, and when he came up and he was like, I get it. This happens, and it was probably a mistake, and it's no big deal. And like, it's okay, everything's fine. And then as I'm resetting again and again, like the second time, it's no more Mr. Nice Mole, is what he says. Yeah. And then, like, because I did so many in a row, there was like, after 4 or 5, he has Don Resetti come, who basically makes you an offer you can't refuse or something.
Another character?
Yeah, like his dad or something.
Oh, no, I've never seen that. How funny.
Yeah, if you do a bunch in a row. And then there was a point at which I went to my mailbox like I always did. I was like, oh, he didn't come this time. I must have finally, run the counter out. So I came out of the house. There was no Mr. Resetti. And I went to get my mail for some reason. I don't know why, because I had just time traveled and I wasn't going to save, but it was habit. Like, steps out of the house, get the mail. And my mailbox was full of letters, just letter. I mean, the whole inventory filled up of letters. Uh-huh. I was like, whoa, that's really weird. And I'm like, well, I guess I should see what those are all about. Like, did I get a bunch? Are these stored up? Oh, no. And the buttons don't work. So I couldn't go to my inventory. I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, well, maybe and so I go to leave to go up to Tom Nook's, and that's when Mr. Resetti pops up. and chews me out for doing it yet again. So they literally mess with your controls to be like, no, you can't, stop it. You're not allowed to do this. So it just kept going. I mean, it's very, there was one point where I was talking to him and I went, I did that thing where you kind of speed through, with the B button. Mm-hmm. and I got to the end and it took me straight to a menu, and then I hit the B button answer instead of the A button answer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, you got all that? And I basically said no. And he's like, you were just speeding through this, weren't you, with the B button? And he's like, well, in that case, then you're going to have to listen to it all again. And he literally does the whole thing again. I mean, it was like, oh my God, they played so much with that. And that is a thing that very few people will probably see.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect microcosm of all the things that we've talked about with the game, as far as putting everything in the game. Everything becomes an animal, right? Every mechanic has animal associations, and this is literally like some hardware feature that they it's not the only one, but they turn that into an animal. They represent it as another character. I love that he pops up out of the ground. He's a mole, and he's got a hard hat on, and he's talking again and again about how he gets migraines when the reset alarm goes off, and oh my God, it was so good. But having had that once, I was like, I don't want to save. I don't want this. I was protective of my town, this little Kentucky Hollow of mine called Bullet, and I don't know. I got to the point where I was like, I don't want to. This is not part of my game. This is just for the podcast, because I might keep playing.
Yeah. That's fair. No, that's good. No, and I think it's good that we had the contrasting experience on that, because it's probably because I'm looking forward to diving pretty deeply into New Horizons.
Right. So, and that might be what I end up doing actually, but at the same time, I felt protective of this.
No, I think that's great. Way. That's exactly what they want.
I mean,
it
engenders that. Yeah.
And
this almost 2-decade-old game that I played for like a whole year back then, I'm still protective of. Is where we are.
But that's the sign of success, right? That they found this weird corner of gaming to present to people in a completely unexpected way,
right?
Where you can have that experience, and a character like Resetti, who is like the like you said, beautifully put, the animal version of like the Windows blue screen or something,
right.
Is seen as this almost like, and that's why I was joking, like he was a meme before memes existed. He was the villain of Animal Crossing, even though it's really the player's fault that he appears, so it's this funny sort of shaming in gaming kind of situation, playful. Also
that they know, right? They as designers are having a dialogue with you there.
Yes.
We know what you do. We know that you're time traveling.
Oh,
we
know
so
good.
Yeah.
It's so good, and it's so rare, and it's so specific to the game, and it works so well. It's like, it's one of those things that, like we were talking about one of the episodes about like how designs probably emerged during development, how ideas came up. It's like, man, when we're developing the game, we reset a lot.
I was gonna say, how many times in development did they hit the reset button? A billion. And they were like, what if, like, I wonder how many million times that happened before they were like, oh, what if we did something on that? You definitely see that happening. And those are like, things like that are just so magical in development, when you have a moment of like, oh, the player's going to do this.
Yeah. Right.
The player's going to do this thing that I just did. This thing that I just saw, the player's going to do, or whatever. And, and we should react to that, because we're not currently reacting to that. And there wasn't really a thing there, but suddenly there's like a need to have a thing there. Whether that's a bad thing, sometimes that's like, oh, that was a bad thing, that shouldn't happen. It's like, that's really the role of QA, right? Is to see all the things the player never should. This is like a positive version of that. Like to see all the things that the player that you haven't put in, that the player's going to do, that you should have some kind of positive reaction to, or a reaction to. So,
yeah. Well, and he as a character has become such an infamous character that, and I believe that I think in New Horizons he was retired. There was a big deal about him being retired. They actually had a meme about that too, that popped up, of like him retiring. And I think Nintendo even embraced, don't quote me on this, but they might have even sent out a fake press release that Resetti retired.
Yeah, I think that's something along those lines. Yeah,
because obviously it's like an online, online always kind of game, or always online game or something like that. I forget.
right,
It
right.
seems
So
to make sense to me
no
that there's no
reset,
reason
right?
to have him. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's no reason. You can't really, resetting doesn't give you anything in New Horizons. But the funny thing about him, even though he's a negative reinforcement mechanic, he became so infamous that people still wanted to see him. There's
right.
like, have you seen this Resetti guy? And it's like, no. So you kind of like it encourages you to do something you really shouldn't, just to see the hilariousness of it.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
like
it
you
reminds
said,
me of a Blizzard game, like an RTS, where you click on the unit 7 times,
yeah.
and then the 8th time it starts saying things, so you end up doing that's completely contrary to what you would want to be doing at that moment. You're wasting clicks, as it were. You're wasting time clicking on a unit 12 times so you can get it to, I don't know, do the RoboCop lines or something like that in StarCraft.
Yeah. He's like a really elaborate Easter egg.
Yeah, he really is. And it was way more deep than I expected.
No, me too. I didn't know it went that far. And the fact that they customized so much of him to go that far is hilarious to me. What happened? So what happened with the mail though? You said a bunch of mail came in. Was
there
it
were
fake,
all these
fake
letters,
mail?
but it was basically fake. It was
you couldn't open them.
I don't remember. Gosh, I don't remember. I don't remember trying. Actually, I think at that point I was like, I'm not doing this again. Like,
what I thought you were going to say is they were from
No,
him.
I didn't. I don't think I even looked. I think I was like, why would I even look? No, they might have been, but I don't remember looking at them, and I should have.
That's hilarious.
But it was really funny that suddenly there was whatever it is, a dozen letters and 10 letters, something like that, and it filled up, and I was like, oh man, what happened?
Yeah,
what did I miss? And I'm trying to get into that. The button doesn't work. It was so good. They know they sure are. I mean, they're straight up trolling me. So good. It's very, very funny. So I'm glad that I didn't save, kind of, to have seen that, because he was a whole thing I had forgotten all about, if I even indeed saw him at the time. Very good. Very good.
Yeah. I had accidentally seen him because I did a bunch of, time travel stuff. And then I think it was like late at night, and I was like, ugh, just can't be bothered to go back and save. I was just tired. So I just turned the machine off, but that counts as a reset. And so
it sure does.
I started up again the next day, and he popped up and I forgot. But if you just time travel and save between each one, you don't get him, of course.
Right.
But my town is now a mess. I mean, it's like
right, and that was why
show.
I didn't want to save it, is because there were weeds everywhere, and literally every time I'd start like picking the weeds, I'm like, why am I doing this? I'm not going to save the game, and it was just so gross, and it made me. I mean, it was the same thing that happened when I had started up that save that I had, where I was like, oh, I don't want to, I don't want to. I don't want to be here. It's weeds everywhere, and
cockroaches too.
Yeah, and cockroaches in the house, and because that first reset, basically persists before I even change the clock. I still ended up with the cockroaches in my house in my game, in my main, because eventually I went back, I set the clock back to what it should be, and continued, and I still ended up with the cockroaches. And I was like, oh, right, of course, because there's still a reset in there.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, going backwards in time, it seems like there's just it's just a world. It's not like on a timeline, like a discrete timeline. It's just a world state, right? So like if you go backwards in time after you've gone forwards, it's not like it takes if I were to if I were to time travel back to my original date now, even though I've saved in between each one, I think that all the weeds will still be there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I don't think it keeps track
part
of
the
that.
Town. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's that smart. I don't think it's like a timeline based world state. I think it's like a individual discrete or something. I don't know.
It just looks at the clock when it starts it up and says,
exactly,
when's the last time it played, and if that's a long time in the future, it just goes and says, well, or for every day, put in a few weeds. I mean, even when I skip a day, I'm like, there's more weeds here than I normally expect. Like often there's no weeds, and then suddenly there's weeds all over the place. So yeah, it's been a whole
Oh
thing.
yeah. I also started not even covering up the holes that I was digging too. So like I have weeds and holes and cockroaches, and every time I would time travel, I would have one or two letters from animals saying that they've moved out.
Yeah.
Just
Oh
like,
yeah.
see ya.
I ended up losing an animal actually in my
Oh,
pad.
I had some come and go that I didn't even see. I've never even met. Like they're like, this one sent me a letter. I was like, "Who are you?" I didn't even know you moved to my town.
Right. Yeah. I got one of those too at some point. I think when I was jumping around, maybe.
So
yeah. So I lost Patty and got Pom Pom. I think is the one I got.
it's funny. We got a lot of. I don't know.
A
If
duck.
we only had a couple crossovers, but for the most part, we got pretty unique sets. Speaking of the time travel stuff, technically, I have a question I kept forgetting to ask you that you may not be able to answer. A technical question. I think it's technical. So you know how I don't know if it's like loading. So when you go from sort of screen to screen, it has a sort of, it's like it loads the next screen.
Right. When it slots over. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that a load happening there, or like a streaming load or something? Why isn't it not just a contiguous world like it is in the future ones? Was that a...
Yeah, I'm not really sure. Like, so I was thinking maybe there's it's almost certainly a memory thing, and I wonder if they're sort of compressing what's going on in each section sort of independently, right? Just in terms of what the data is, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they're basically moving it into active memory to deal with it, uncompressing maybe that section and storing it all. I mean, there's probably, because every square could be occupied by some potentially very large number of things, right? Because you could take literally arbitrarily any item in your catalog and drop it anywhere, right? Things like that.
Yeah.
So you end up having basically, say, I don't know, maybe 65,000 things, maybe 60, a 16-bit number to represent the item that's sitting on top of any given square, something like that. Mm-hmm. And they're just moving those in and out so that they can account for literally whatever would be in that space, and additional simulation data rather about that, because they might store how long has that thing been there, right? Because maybe they automatically get rid of things after some period of time, or certainly trees and whatever have to grow, or change their state over time as well. So that would be my guess, is that it's something like that, that they do that for, so that they don't actually have to, just for basically performance reasons, right? Only have to worry about a certain number of things. I don't really know. I don't really know for sure why they do that, because it doesn't seem like it needs to happen.
Yeah, that's why.
Otherwise.
Right. That's why I was, and some of it is based on having been playing the series, the whole time, and kind of coming back to this one for the podcast and realizing that little, sort of weird streaming load thing is happening. I mean, this was a disc-based game, so there's that versus a cart as well. So I don't know if that has a bearing on it. But then, for instance, in the next one, which I guess would have been Wild World, maybe I'm getting them mixed up. I don't remember if City Folk was the Wii version, but at some point what they end up doing is they kind of put the whole world on like a cylinder, and you just kind of you're like, when you move north on the screen, kind of the whole world rotates with you. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost like it's almost like a clipping plane, but it's
right, like a classic, like asteroids or whatever.
No, like it doesn't wrap around, but it, like, the horizon is moving. It's like you're going over a hill. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
So it's almost like it's clipping out the stuff you can't see, because the horizon is, it's like, it's like it's like the planet. If you could see see the planet, the horizon of the planet, even though it looks flat. So in that case, you can kind of imagine that they're rendering and pulling stuff out as you don't see over that horizon. But in this case, they're doing it differently. So, and the quads, the other thing that I think they move away from, even on the map in the future, is, the map is broken up by those squares in that grid, right? So there's the acres, they call them, right? So the A through whatever, and 1 through 5. And so each of those loads is one of those acres. So there's also a representation. So if somebody says go to A5, then that is where the load boundary is. Yeah, I don't know. It just came to mind because
it's also, it's also possible that it's literally just to make it clear that you've crossed a boundary like that. So if you are trying to get to a place, how many you've gone.
Could be.
So it might be a design answer rather than a technical answer. I'm not I don't have any problem with that, and I would just pop open the map if I ever were I don't know where I am.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that also being a thing, that they just wanted to make the transitions clear, this is when you've crossed into this other area.
Yeah.
Because it seems weird to me that even if they have to store an arbitrary value or whatever and some other stuff about every possible square, that's still just not a ton of memory.
Yeah. Not only that, but they don't represent, if a piece of furniture is, or even most items actually, when you put them on the ground, they're not.
Yeah, they're just leaves, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which does
all they have to do is all they need is that number. What am I? Am I cabana bookcase, or
right?
I don't know, rustic table or UFO, and whatever I am. So,
yep. Yeah. So anyway, that was just a weird question, because if it is a design decision, I feel like it's also a weird one, because I've never liked that delay, because it's some of it's breaking flow, but some of it is just, it becomes, I don't know, the feedback is fairly unresponsive, so it's there's times when I'm bumped up against a tree and I don't know it, and I think I'm loading, but it's not. I'm hitting the tree, and the pause is from the tree, not from the load or whatever. Right. So it's just a funny decision either way. So anyway.
Yeah, it is a really odd one. I do definitely, whenever I cross it, which is of course all the time, I always am that's just I literally am this is turning a page. Yeah. I don't know if it's maybe it's purely aesthetic, some of the interaction choices, right? In for example, having to open every piece of mail, pick up the present, drag the present into your inventory, click it again to open the present. There's a lot of stuff that's busy work in that way. That is clearly a choice, right? I mean, there are no limitations there on what they're doing. They could easily make it that when you drag a present to your inventory, poof, you're done, right? It turns into whatever. But they make it a separate step, and that's clearly an aesthetic choice. So it would not surprise me that it might even just be an aesthetic choice that they like that. For some reason.
Well, and the funny thing is, especially if that's the case, that I looked up the order really quickly. New Leaf is the one that's. Wild World. No, these aren't in order actually. Anyway, whichever the next one is. They made a big deal out of the world being contiguous, so that was gone. You know what I mean? And people were excited about it because it was you just move through the world, in a very smooth manner, and that was a feature, an upgraded feature. So eventually, they realized whatever the reason is, they're doing this, technical or design, that people didn't like it. So
it's Wild World, then City Folk, then New Leaf, then New Horizons. On the main. Okay, that's the order of the main games. The spin-off games are Happy Home Designer, Amiibo Festival, and Pocket Camp, which all came between New Leaf and New Horizons. So
so the New Leaf was DS then. Yeah, so that was still not super powerful machine, but powerful enough to do this. So anyway, that was a digression, but I needed to ask before. So let me go through some of the other. I wanted to just share some of the stories from a couple of those holidays.
Oh, yeah.
And then we can move on. And you can share some, or were you done with your...
No, that's it. Yeah, no, that's it. Is just I wanted to protect my happy home.
Yeah, no, that's good. You're a happy home designer. That's a thing. That's the name of a thing.
I know. I just read it a moment ago.
Oh, you did. I didn't hear you say that one. Anyway, yeah. So some of the funnier ones that are so adorable and specific to the game, I forgot to mention, the one I forgot to mention earlier was morning aerobics. I made sure I did that because I do remember, because that one takes place over like the course of a month. I think it's every morning or maybe Sunday mornings. And you get I think it's every morning. You get a little card from Tortimer if you go every day. And if you go 14 days over the course of a month, then he gives you, I forget what he gives you, but again, one of those special models. And it's ridiculous, but also adorable. So Cooper is out there without his uniform on, and he's basically leading some of the animals in a basically like a aerobics jazzercise kind of thing. There's music playing, and then and they're all in unison. They're animated in unison, so they're all like doing the moves all the same way, and the music's playing, and they're making the most adorable sounds because they're like, they're grunting or huffing and puffing.
They're exercising. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some of them like have the the upset emote happen when they're getting really tired, and
right.
So it's just the most adorable thing. And so if you are standing there, you can use the C stick and move it in different directions, and you will exercise. Now, unfortunately, you can't do it in unison with them, and I don't think that's either possible or there's no real reason to do it. So it's not really a mini game, but that's what makes it even more hilarious because they're all in perfect unison to the music, yeah. And you're standing there like doing random like stretches and jumping jacks and like in no particular order. And it just looks ridiculous because you're just like, who is this kid in here totally messing with our fun?
That is such a kid. That is such a kid thing too, though. Is if you ever exercise with children around and they start imitating you, they're of course delayed, and then they're trying to do, but they've never done what you're doing, especially if you're doing something like yoga. So they're not sure how to move their body that way, and they end up falling over and stuff. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, that's exactly
very
what
nice.
It looks like. Yeah, so it's adorable, especially the audio design. And then the sports one is actually funny because that takes place over it's 2 days in consecutive days, but it's basically a day cycle. And I think it starts with actually the same aerobics, but I skipped that because I didn't need to see it. And then it goes into, I only looked at one of the sports because it's like based on hour by hour, and I didn't want to like go through every hour. One of them is a race, which you kind of can participate in. They race around the wishing well. So basically all of these it's sports day. You talk to Tortimer, you get a medal that you can display in your house. But the funny thing about it is you can't really participate in any of the sports. You're just watching the animals do it. And so one of them is a tug of war where there's two teams and they're on the, obviously on either end of the rope. And then one of them is a race. You can kind of pretend you're participating by running with them and sprinting with them, but it doesn't really do anything. And then one of them is just two teams throwing balls into a basket. And it's really, they're actually using some physics. So it's pretty adorable to see them missing and hitting. But again, you can't really do anything with it. So it's just it's such a funny specific thing. There's also maybe one I'm missing, but it happens from like 9 a.m. to like 4 p.m. In 2-hour increments. So the reason I'm bringing the sports one up is it's such a, like, to play all day. I guess in that case, what they want you to do is come back like every 2 hours or something. Right. But it's such a funny appointment mechanic, because A, you're really just watching, and B, like, it's not, yes, kids could potentially play all day or come back throughout the day. But I think one thing with the holidays in general for me, and I think when I'm looking back on my first time I played this game, the reason I didn't actually see a lot of the holiday content is that I wasn't probably going to play on a holiday. You know what I mean? So it's an appointment mechanic, and it's very logical that they would have it on some of these. But the fact that you actually have to play on these times when a lot of people are probably with family or doing something,
right.
it's not like I don't remember if I actually did Halloween, but usually I'm out or something,
Yeah,
right?
I
So
didn't because I mean I had young children when this came out, and we would have been out doing that sort of thing. I think
yeah,
I
or if
certainly
you're
wouldn't have been playing video games.
exactly, yeah, or if you're a kid, you're probably out trick or treating, So it's
Right.
a funny tension, I guess, is why I'm bringing it up of how it makes sense that you'd want these all to be in, on the day that they occur, but also there's this weird tension of like, do I go and ignore the holiday essentially to go play the game to see it? So I don't know. It's dawning on me why I didn't see a lot of the holidays the first time. And then I did go find Jingle on Toy Day, which is again another day that I probably wouldn't have played. 24th of December. And he's similar to the Jack thing. If you talk to him, he will give you pieces of a set, which is like a snowman kind of theme set that you can put in your, in your house. And he's a reindeer that runs around town. But I think that's basically it. The cool thing about that, which I guess with New Year's you would have missed, it's obviously snowy, but most of the trees have Christmas tree lights on them.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, it was snowy on New Year's Eve, or New Year's Eve, but there were no lights.
Yeah, so some more custom content like the cherry blossoms. The cherry blossoms are visually neat. The only thing that's really happening is at the wishing well they're having a party. And so there's some tables set up with a bunch of food that you really can't interact with, but there's special music playing, and Tortimer gives you a pink tree model that you can add to the miniature set.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So he pretty much all, you get something from Tortimer in most of these. So it's an intriguing, the whole appointment mechanic from an annual perspective is a very intriguing, cool thing that I just think creates an interesting real world tension. I think with MMOs, what they ended up kind of eventually doing is the events were not day specific, right? They're week long or month long. So you can still take advantage of them whenever you have time versus like that specific day. So I'll be interested to see how New Horizons deals with some of that stuff.
Absolutely. I'm very curious. I mean, they've already had their first event because the game came out not so long before Easter, and there was a whole
Bunny Day, I think it's called,
going on.
Yeah. And they have the same thing in Pocket Camp too. So I think it's similar.
I gather there was lots of eggs.
Yeah, eggs.
There's collecting whole sets of eggs to do something with. There was a whole egg economy, I guess, an egg-onomy, I guess, and there was a whole thing.
Yeah.
I have not started that game yet, so we shall see. My last we have two topics left. One is me going to the island. Is KK Slider. But so for the island, I dug up my Game Boy Advance, but I had actually had help from Gothic Chocobo via Twitter to the Dev Game Club account, direct messaging and saying, hey, have you thought about just using your Game Boy player? Since I've been playing the game on the Wii, which automatically pops up a notification if you want to put the game into 480p instead of progressive scan mode instead of alternating, and so I was like, I literally never thought about it. I didn't even know. I mean, I've had a Game Boy player attachment for my GameCube since that thing came out, so a long time. But I don't think I ever thought to attach it as a Game Boy to something else. And if I can find it, he actually sent me an article about some friends hooking up 5 GameCubes to play Four Sword. So they had four GameCubes as insane controllers with their own individual TVs to connect to a 5th GameCube, which was running the game to play that. But anyway, I did not know that you could I mean, it makes sense that you should be able to do anything with it and it should have the attachment, but I just never thought that it would. And it never occurred to me to check. But it does. It just has I found my link cable and I hooked it up. And the island is reachable by going down to the dock that sticks out into the ocean and talking with Kapp'n, a kappa, a turtle with the bald spot in the center. Mm-hmm. And he'll take you over there. I mean, basically he communicates with your Game Boy, and you can actually go on the Game Boy and walk around. I mean, not walk around. You just sort of visualize top down your whole space as well. That's a thing you can do. But once you get over there, there are in fact coconuts. There are a couple characters. I guess there was one character, and there was a house that had clothing that I could just take. It had island shirts. There's a red version and a blue version that were really nice. So yeah, I went over there. I picked a bunch of coconuts. There were some good shells on the beach. It's not something I would do with any kind of regularity, but I think my favorite thing was that every time Kapp'n takes you, while this is all going on, he's rowing you across and he sings songs about whatever. But one of them is the cucumber song, which is quite quite something. It is definitely quite the double entendre, because he is of course a green turtle, and yeah, it's really wow. They went there. It was very funny. But yeah, I did really enjoy that. Some of his shanties are sort of dirges, and some of them are more, dancing and whatever type. They all use the same. Do they all use the same basic melody? I think they might, but there's definitely a sense of like, oh, this is a funny one versus this one's kind of a little. There's one about saying goodbye to some woman or whatever, and so there's some that are a little sadder or whatever. But oh, very good. I mean, that was not something I'd ever done. I didn't know you could do it. I mean, that was probably in the manual, and it never would have occurred to me to check on my own, or even indeed by 2001, who was reading manuals anymore? So I never had seen that, and I was glad that I did it. It's not something I would probably spend a ton of time doing, but I did go back and forth 3 times to clear the island out of coconuts and shells and things like that, because there were several white scallops. So it was very good. It was a good time.
So do you know if you could plant those coconuts to...
You could. I don't think it would. They were only worth 150, I think, versus 100 for my pears. Oh, okay. And there's only 2 per tree, so it's like, well, each tree is worth the same amount at that point.
Yeah.
And although, admittedly, I guess you could quickly grow up to an orchard and be able to carry more of them. Right? More. You could take fewer trips to get the same amount of money, I guess. But I didn't really see the benefit. I'd want to plant them down by the water because aesthetics are important. And so then I would, it would not be efficient for me. So I decided not to invest in that. But yeah, that was, I was very entertained by that whole thing, and was a nice, I mean, I will say it's amazing to me how much I'm still discovering about this game. 2 decades after I played, the better part of a year, if not a whole year, playing it back in the day. So it's remarkable to me how much stuff is packed into this tiny package.
Yeah, it's a game about discovery and stories too, more than people realize. It's not just living life. There's a lot of little things. Did you ever dig up any bugs? Did you know about that?
I have not dug up any bugs. I did catch a coelacanth in the ocean.
Oh, wow! I don't think I've ever done that.
Yeah, you can catch. I can't remember what they call it. They call it like a prehistoric fish or something like that, and it sells for 15,000 bells, something like that. It sells for a ton of bells.
So it's a fish.
It's a fish. Yeah, it's a coelacanth. It's in the ocean. You have to fish for it.
Oh, nice. But it counts as a bug. I don't know if I know what a coelacanth is.
Oh, no, a coelacanth is a fish. It's a prehistoric fish that actually still exists on our planet.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I'll spell it for you and send you a mail.
Okay. Um, yeah, no.
One was discovered, I believe, in the Mediterranean around this time, like in
Oh,
late
yeah.
1990s, maybe. That somebody
Living.
fished a living coelacanth out of the Mediterranean, I believe, in like Greece or Italy,
Crazy.
and it was it was a big deal because like what coelacanths still exist it was a whole thing. Yeah, they are
Wow.
really ugly too. But yeah,
But worth a lot.
yep.
No, I mean, I was just bringing that up as sort of like that sense of discovery, because there's certain times when you'll be running around and you'll hear a bug, but you can't see it. And there's
Oh,
certain
interesting.
bugs that are actually under the ground, so you have to dig them up at the right spot by like triangulating, or
The
positioning the
audio.
stereo, because it'll go to the left or the right if you're off, and then you have to switch to your bug net really quick before it runs away, and catch it that way.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, so it's like, it's just there's just it's just crazy. But one of the things I loved about time traveling is just seeing the seasons and seeing all the bugs that change, through the seasons. I caught a bunch of new fresh bugs because of the season change, and you know, I don't know. I still only probably have about half of them, total, but it's still neat to see the variety, because you see like grasshoppers showing up and locusts and red dragonflies instead of the regular ones, and and they kind of tried to, at least based on the northern hemisphere, they tried to sort of logically place those bugs in the season that they would come in, so adds a little bit of that groundedness too. So that was fun.
Yeah, no, it is, yeah, it's an endlessly fascinating game from that standpoint, and it is. I'm not kidding. I might keep playing. Like it might be just part of my day now.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, I had the same thought. Again, I think if New Horizons, we'll see if New Horizons catches with me or not. But I had the same thought. The only time I ended up going to Red, actually, he, by chance or maybe through their own sort of algorithms, had a piece of cabin furniture,
ooh,
which is, the one set that I'm always looking for, and for him to have it, is like, so I actually have 3 or 4 pieces, of it now. And when I get close to a full set, then I want to keep playing, right? Because I want to get that set. And my fossils are doing pretty well. Like I almost have all of those. So, um, the museum is my favorite, I think, thing in the game. Going into the bug room when you have a lot of bugs in there is just magical.
yeah. I don't have tons of bugs yet because I mostly play
Yeah.
at
Right.
6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whatever. So
Yeah.
6 o'clock. So there's just not a lot of bugs at that time of day, and half my Saturdays it's been raining, so I've still only got like 6 or 7 bugs.
Yep.
Where I actually spend time fishing basically every day. I go to the ocean and fish, and it's funny. I mean, this is not a topic we need to spend much time on, but it reminds me of MMOs in the same way, or really any game that has a representation of the world
Mm-hmm.
that is somewhat accurate. My particular thing I'm thinking of is in World of Warcraft. There are basically flowers that you pick,
Mm-hmm. For herbal.
right, for herbal, yeah, to feed in, I guess, to alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you get to a point where you notice that you can see one on the horizon, that you can see one sort of distant from you and go, oh, I know what that is, I can go get it.
Mm-hmm.
Or I haven't seen that one before. You start to be able to pick them out because they just stand out a little bit. They don't, right, it's not a perfect, it's not a super realistic world, so it's easy to make those things sort of distinct and stand out a little bit, but also feel like they fit.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens here, where I'll go down by the ocean, and the reason why I even fished for the coelacanth that was off the dock was like, oh, that looks a little bigger than the fish I normally see. Like
Right.
I noticed that, and that was because I go down by the water every day. And so it's like when you say something like about the bugs, say I haven't really focused on the bugs because again, they're not often there. And you're talking about like, yeah, there's this whole triangulate and dig the bug up and then snag it with a net. I'm like, I would not find that. because I'm not attuned to that in the world, right?
Right.
And one of the things that happens in World of Warcraft with those things is I'm running around and I've got the little map helper thing that you can do, like to sense them when you're an herbalist or whatever. And so you notice that they're there. It's just, it becomes like you are focused on it. And because I'm focused on going down and maybe trying to catch a red snapper or two before my time is up, I'm going down to the ocean all the time and noticing that the fish that's normally here, I think, is a little bit smaller than this, right? And so that's how I caught that. It's how I caught my first loach yesterday, which was in the rivers. It's I don't know. There's just something about that we've talked about that even in a game that we didn't particularly care for in GTA, of just like getting to know a space.
Right.
This is like getting to know the ecosystems. And it's this sort of repeated, do it a little bit every day thing, I think, that helps tremendously with that. I mean, WoW is do it a lot every day, but same sort of thing.
Yeah, that daily rhythm, and that I think your word attuned, I think you said, is a good way to describe it too, because you really do become ingrained with the world. And I think with a good sim like Animal Crossing, it gives you various opportunities to just get into whatever you want to get into, right? You don't have to get into everything. You don't have to get into the bugs. You can get into fishing. You could really become like in this game, and it becomes even more elaborate, as you can imagine in the later games. Like you could really become a farmer, right? Like that could be your thing. You could really like orchards and flowers, and even in the you can start cross-pollinating in some of the games where you can create different breeds of flowers based on what you grow. So like, and people find their thing that they really get into, right? And then they don't even go into another aspect of it. And I think that is a good sign. Again, not being a big Sims player, or I don't know if some of that stuff's in there. Similar things. I guess it's just a different beast, but yeah, that's neat. And then when you get that loach, as somebody who has really devoted themselves to fishing, like that moment is it's so simple, but I'm sure that was a big moment for you.
Rewarding. Yeah, and the coelacanth was just like
coelacanth is like, oh, I'm in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, now I know where I am in the world.
Yeah.
Really good. All right, well, let's take a break and come back for takeaways, and we actually have a couple pieces of feedback.
Okay.
Welcome back from the break. It is the end of the series, or at the end of the main series. I think we're going to do a bonus one on this one, and we've been talking a little bit about the New Horizons. But we should turn first to our takeaways, because that's what we like to do here. Go ahead. I mean, so I think a lot of these will be in common, so we'll kind of chime in, but I definitely have a couple I'm not sure you'll have. So why don't you take it away, sir?
Yeah, these are going to be super obvious for this game because it's so unique. But yeah, so the first one is obviously the whole concept of real appointment gaming is such a pillar and focus. We just had a whole episode where we were talking about sort of, obviously the annual calendar aspect of that, but they had daily, weekly, monthly sort of rhythms to appointment gaming. And though it definitely existed in the medium in different ways, I don't think until this game was there really anything that was at least mainstream-ish that was this committed to it, as a sort of like the structure of the game is really about living life from a day-to-day perspective, time of day, right? Like even as an aspect of that I would count. And so, and I don't have a article or white paper, anybody who has written something to confirm this. This is just my own sort of thought, but I mentioned it a couple episodes ago that, we take mobile games for granted, and we take free to play sort of appointment based mechanics for granted these days because it's just commonplace. But that wasn't a thing back in the day, and I'm just curious and wondering if Animal Crossing might have even had an influence on the way to think about limiting. It's not necessarily limiting players' playtime, but it's focusing their playtime around certain moments in the real time of day, around and then essentially monetizing that down the road like they do now.
Right.
Where he's like, well, I can't play anymore because I've done everything I need to do today, kind of thing, right? Or I don't really want to, or I'm not going to play today because I want to play tomorrow because that's when Red's coming. You know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah, I mean, this was 3 or 4 years before the big, the first place that really turned up was Facebook gaming. Right.
Yeah, I would say Zynga is one of the leaders of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that really happened around things like, I guess, Farmville would be the big one, but also Mafia Wars.
Yeah,
right.
Mafia Wars was maybe one of the first, and they had a racing theme one.
No,
and and then
the algorithm changed, and
yeah, and then there's whole nother topic there, but I just it never really kind of occurred to me to connect the two, and who knows, maybe there isn't a connection there, but for me there's a connection of how important appointment-based gaming actually can be, especially in a game like this where you're not monetized around it, you're actually just doing it for fun, and that's a whole different kind of, there's a liberation to that.
I mean, it's also one of the sort of last vestiges of being able to share that experience kind of around, if you're not time traveling and things like that, but having the water cooler talk of like, oh man, did you, this week is, spring cleaning day or what have you, that would come up, the things that have come up here, that you would have those opportunities like, oh, you wouldn't believe. I mean, we're both having those experiences now, 20 years on, nearly. So it really does do that. And it's like from our youth, right? Appointment television or something like that, where you'd have to watch a show every week. This was not that far off from the time when shows were trying to push the boundaries of what was possible with that anyway, in terms of more connected shows and things like that. So it feels like there's a bit of a zeitgeist that's cross media with that sort of thing. Like The Sopranos would have been around this time, as I recall, right around 2000. But that had been that sort of type of television. Other than soap operas, I shouldn't really discount them because that's a big part of their pleasure, right? Is that every day you get a few moments advancing multiple storylines over the course of a half hour or whatever.
Right. Keep you coming back.
Yeah, keep you coming back and just sort of getting dripped out. So yeah, maybe some influence there as well. I'm gonna take mine. I think my first one that I'm not sure you would have picked was leaning into the cozy aesthetic. Or as I've heard it called more recently, tend-and-befriend, as opposed to fight or flight gaming. This is a tend-and-befriend sort of game. You're tending this every day like a garden, and you're making relationships in here as well. Not in a weird, creepy dating game sort of way that sort of was really still like achievement based gaming in something like a dating sim, but really in a just like, no, you're just here to, they have a little bit of mechanics around the loans and things like that, but fundamentally it's, I come in, I check in with my with my animals, see if I can do anything for any of them. I might I continue to work on my collection, and I do lots of little cozy sorts of activities. It's partly the appointment based nature of that, but it's also just like how many delightful things there are in that. And we've spent a whole episode basically talking about different ways that this game is delightful, and it has come up in every episode. So I think it's really and I mean, just how much they were willing to devote to that, and just like found different ways to add more and more and more of that, because they could have made it a lot more about purchasing constantly, right? I mean, that's really sort of like what The Sims is about, and that's why this is so different. Is that this is really not that. That's sort of there, but it's also not a huge part of it. You're not directly managing all these different animals, or their whatever's going on with them. You're just kind of doing favors for them if you want to. You can avoid that. If you want to just kind of talk to them and ask them, like, hey, what's up? Like, every day you could just do that with them. Like, how are you doing? You could write them letters. You could, I mean, there's just that nice warm bath feeling of this game that I think is really important to it. And one of the reasons why I didn't want to save my game with a million weeds in it. So
yeah, and it's actually similar to my second one. The one thing to your point about tending to the world and sort of choosing how to very comfort in a comfort sort of way what you choose to do each day. It's going to be, I think that this topic will come back up again with New Horizons from what little I've played, if we're going to do a bonus episode, because there is remind me that I want to come back to this topic when it comes to that game in particular, because of what I'm a little worried about. It's sort of what its main thrust ends up kind of becoming over time. And I think ultimately at its core, it's still going to be Animal Crossing, and it won't really ruin that. But it starts in a way that I really like, and I'm worried that it's going to kind of encourage me to leave that kind of starting life behind to expand and, and purchase and become bigger
and terraform and
yeah, and I'll explain this later, but it's interesting because I this game, the original game, I think retains it much better even. So it's, it's sort of that question of sometimes it's not good to give them more, more
right.
ways to tend, or at least encourage them to do certain things. But yeah, my second one is sort of connected, I think, and I think it's similar. It's a different way to say the same thing you're saying, and I was just sort of coming at it from the perspective of kind of non-lethal gaming or non-conflict gaming,
Right.
And so it's the way they're doing that is creating a cozy environment like you're talking about. But at least for me at the time when it came out, and I think for a lot of us playing it, and I think we talked about this maybe especially in the first episode of the series, it just was such a diamond in the rough, just so unorthodox when it comes to at least core gaming, to have this game that was so different when it came to its approach of goals and motivations and lack of conflict and lack of anxiety and no reason to fight or flight and that kind of stuff. So that's obviously a core tenet for them. And you hear sometimes when people talk about the series, Animal Crossing, the series, they call them kids games, but I don't think that's really fair or really a good descriptor. I think it is good for kids, right? But it's also the kind of game that is fun for anyone to just live in.
Yeah.
If you don't want the anxiety that a lot of that most video games actually bring you.
Right. Like a Pixar movie,
yes.
Which I would just call a movie.
Yes. Right.
They're just good movies.
Right.
Most of them. I haven't seen all of the last 5 years of them necessarily, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, that's the cinematic example for sure. So yeah, that's my second. What about you?
Yeah, I would say for me the customization, the sort of the many means of player expression is hugely important to the game. Not just, I mean, we haven't really even talked about being able to design your own patterns. I mean, probably neither one of us did much of that because neither of us are particularly artists.
I didn't do much, but
it?
I did do two designs. One was a tree, and one was Batman. Batman symbol.
Of course it was.
So actually, most of the game I wore was just I had the all black Batman on my shirt. So
wow, there you go. Of course you did. This is why he doesn't stream, folks. He doesn't want you to see what he's really like. Yeah, no, I didn't because I can't. I am both a perfectionist and don't have I can't get past the part where I have to do a lot of practice to not be bad at drawing.
Yeah.
That my brain just two parts of me like I'd really like to do that, but I cannot look at what I'm doing while I'm doing it. So I do not do those art things. But I also meant just like the sorts of things you can choose to decorate your home with. I'm still really kind of disturbed that you don't have a whole floor full of gyroids. I mean, to me, that's a perfect expression of a wondrous thing.
On the other side of that. I don't. How is it set up? Is it just like a maze? Can you even go inside? Is it just
you really come in the door and you could go about 2 squares in before you're just walled in by gyroids that are all making different noises and ding, ding. Now that I put in the basement. Now I have the basement, and so I've been putting stuff down there. I basically take things down there and put them down to be like, do I want this upstairs with the gyroids? And the UFO, I was like, oh, I totally want this up there with the gyroids. So I had to clear a path to where I had the swimming pool, take the swimming pool and put it downstairs, and bring the UFO up and put it in the place where the swimming pool had been, and then restore the gyroid that walled it off. So that's in one corner of the house. Yeah, I also have I have some furniture that is totally coming out of there once I get enough gyroids to take its place. It's going to be all gyroids on the first floor eventually.
See, that's the thing of nightmares. That's not.
See, for me, there's just something I love the audio quality of it. Like with just 1 or 2, I could get them being totally creepy, but now it's like they're all kind of doing stuff, and they're all doing it in their own rhythm, and it's sort of just like visually noise, but it makes this really pleasant, like chill, just hanging, and they're just kind of doing their thing. I mean, they're just kind of layering all this on top of one another. It's so good. Yeah. I love it. Love I love that I could totally go that direction, whereas you're trying to get the exact cabana set or whatever, so you can get all the pieces.
Cabin set.
Cabin set. There's also a cabana set.
There is, yes. It's
which is rattan furniture.
Good set. Classic. That's a classic Animal Crossing.
That's a classic set. Yeah, and I know that's a thing that really has found a fuller expression as the series has gone on. I've heard through other podcasts. Not that I'm having tons of time to listen to those anymore, but the thing about that is that there's even more ability to express yourself, I think, and set up scenes. I've heard about people setting up just individual weird things that they're able to make, like the faked moon landing director chair shot or something like that. I heard about that on some podcast. It was probably Waypoint, because they talked a lot about Animal Crossing.
It's
just the like the customizability of all that stuff and how much you can set things up is like, on the one hand, I fear it, especially because there's no gyroids. But
are there no gyroids?
I think this is the only one that has gyroids. This is the only game that has them.
Oh, I guess I never realized that. Having played the others, I never focus on them, so maybe I didn't miss them in the others. But I mean, it's closer to, say, the Sims in that way, maybe, right? Because you can do so much to sort of your house in the world or whatever. But even like, it's adding in some Minecraft. It's adding in,
right?
Like it's very hybridized with a lot of other things. But also, each of the items are discreetly represented anywhere in the world, right? So when you put an item down in the middle of the forest, it's not a representation of it, it's the actual item. You can put a toilet, in the forest, and it'll be a toilet in the forest. So you can imagine people can make all sorts of, especially with terraforming, you can make all sorts of different things. So my my last one, I have kind of 1.5 left, but my last sort of major one that is, again, interconnected with the others, and you've kind of hit it a little bit on the cozy one, but this one's a little bit more abstract, and that's just the commitment to sort of the interaction aesthetics that they have, meaning that you talked about it pretty deeply with the Resetti example that we talked about earlier, of just everything is represented. They try at least to make everything represented as part of the real world game world.
Right.
Whether it be, like the hint system being the male and the animals, or like the bulletin
Or
board.
the bulletin board, yeah.
And so they've tried to make it, even though it's obviously a very fictional and abstracted kind of representational world, because it's of its sort of art style and such, but in its own bubble and its own sort of boundaries, they've represented it as a real place. And so you get your error message in the form of a mole who comes up, and yells at you, or your warning messages. And that's throughout the whole game. And that is a design aesthetic that I love. And as we talked about with sort of the discovery of probably designs that they didn't have when they started the game, I think that's once you make that decision to commit to that kind of design aesthetic, then a lot of opportunities will come up that you just never thought of, because you're like, well, if we make everything representational into the game, or represented in the game, then this means we could do this with, what do we do when we react to them resetting the game multiple times? What do we do when they haven't ever went to go visit Red before? Well, let's have the animals talk about it. Let's have the bulletin board. Let's send them a mail. At one point, I think once Tom Nook's store is big enough, he starts sending you daily mails telling you a special item that's there as an advertisement, kind of, encouraging you to come in and say, hey, today my special item is the cabana table. You should come check it out, and it's kind of, if you haven't been engaging with the store very much, which is rare, but, or maybe you forgot or something, then you get a little hint there. So, and then my favorite one, which I mentioned multiple times, is really the museum, because they could have easily just made, and in fact, they do this to great personal dismay. They do this in the Pocket Camp version. For the mobile version, they don't have a museum. Your collection is just represented as a menu.
Right.
And it's a big bummer. I want my collection to be represented physically so I can actually go into a room and see all of the butterflies.
Oh, yeah.
Around.
Yeah. Whenever I finish a fossil, I go, you've got, I finished the Stegosaurus yesterday. I was like, oh man, I got to go see that. And you go in and there it is. It's
great. Yeah. I don't think in any of the games I've ever got the full set of artwork, which has always bummed me out, because I'd love to see like the paintings all put up, and filled in.
Yeah, what I love about that is that they're all real world paintings. They're just postage stamp sized, so they're pixel art of real paintings, which is just great. And I only have 2, so I'm like, man, I would really like to see a lot more of those. So, like I said, I might still be playing this one, and that really ties into mine, which is my final one, which is the endless discovery of this game. We are talking about this, and there have been things that I've found out in these 4 weeks that I had no idea about. There were, the whole thing with the GBA last week, but also this week, you literally just with the bug, you're like, oh, did you know this about bugs? I'm like, oh my God, no. Like the planting the money trees. There's just so many things, like hitting the rocks. Like there is so much stuff in this game. There is so much. And the reason why they're able to do that, as an aside, is one, I think they really empower the team to suggest and probably have some means of implementing everything. But part of that is all of that is necessarily somewhat shallow, right? There's, you don't, when you go do the aerobics thing, as you pointed out, that you're not doing some rhythm, button matching, whatever game to try to follow the thing. It's just happening, and you can do it. Like you can, you have simple inputs, and you might be able to try to sync it up if you want, I guess, but it's up to you. Which is a very much like, they're not judging you as well, right? By not making these deeper mechanics, there's also a sense in which you're not being judged, and you don't have to feel like you're messing it up. So there's another kind of tend-and-befriend plus to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But just of necessity, nothing super deep, which is also, I think, most games go like to a simple to learn, difficult to master with tons of depth and all of that stuff. I mean, I've been playing MGS4, so perfect example, right, of doing something very different as far as depth goes. This game is very, very shallow throughout, but it's pleasurable how wide that they've made that, which is sort of its own thing, because they make the game then about that sort of endless discovery. Like, you could probably just sit and start theorizing about things that you could try to do at a certain point. And I think that when you play a bunch of it, that's kind of what's going to happen, right? Is that there's a sense that you've exhausted all the ordinary stuff to do, and then you'd start like, well, what about, you'd be sort of like playing with your inventory in an adventure game, like, what if I mix this with this, what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Here that doesn't happen because you're stuck. It happens because you're curious, and that's a better place for that to come from, in my opinion. So really, I really love that about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my last little mini one that is not really necessarily a pillar that they probably would have thought about or talked about, but maybe, but we brought it up multiple times, and it kind of relates to what you were just saying too, that this kind of game really promotes player storytelling. There isn't really a story per se, but the numbers of stories that we told just over the series itself, and then you multiply that by thousands, and remembering, like you said earlier, the water cooler talk behind that, when we were all, working in the same building and playing it together and coming in and telling each other stories about this, that, or whatever that happened. And then, the audience listening to our stories for this series. And, just, it's to your point about it's not deep, but those interactions create these little moments that you take away as stories, just like we talked about with Civilization, where you make your own canon for this,
or with me and Bertha and Allie,
exactly.
and Lily,
or my failed orchard, that
was amazing.
That I was just so building up the pressure to plant this thing, and then it just completely failed. So it's just this isn't a game somebody would describe as a story game, right? But it is. It's just a different kind. And so I wanted to state
for
that
sure.
too.
Yep, absolutely. I will continue to grow out my story of my little Peyton place and Bullet. That's an ancient reference. So
no, I don't actually know that one.
Oh, Peyton Place was it was sort of like, you remember in, I guess maybe it was Beverly Hills 90210. They all lived around a town. Peyton Place was like a tiny little neighborhood. Like they all were in this like literally place, like a cul-de-sac or something, and all the houses. It was a trashy like mini series, and I think a novel back in maybe the 70s. It's not something I've actually ever seen. My parents would refer to it. So,
wow.
Anyway.
Yeah, you went farther back even then.
I sure did. Yeah. Well, I'm not back to the 40s, but I'm bringing it a little more current with the 70s or whatever the Peyton Place was on, maybe in the late 60s. Anyway, yeah, cool. This has been so much fun to revisit, and I'm glad that we decided to. We have a couple of pieces of feedback this time, and well, actually, one thing we should say is, before we go on, like, we are going to play some and talk about New Horizons next week.
Yes.
Okay. So we will do that. I'll pick that up today.
If you're up for it.
I'm up for it. I mean, if it catches me, and I'll play that one instead. But right now, I think, I'm very warm to this one. So we'll see. I also don't play my Switch a ton online, so it's also just kind of a weird, like, it being super more connected, I guess, is a weird thing for me.
And I think that's pretty opt-in-y anyway, so you don't have to engage with that stuff, as far as I've seen so far. Yeah,
if I can stay away from the internet, that's the best. Okay, so let me get to our two pieces of feedback. The first is in defense of Tim's honor, a singing non-review from Blarg42. Clearly your real name. and it goes as follows. I was most dismayed and definitely did not laugh out loud for a solid minute. No, sir. When I heard the cruel prank Brett, a.k.a. Violet, had played on his esteemed colleague Tim in episode 210. As a fellow Metal Gear aficionado, I took it upon myself to uphold his honor and wrote this little piece centered around one of Brett's favorite things, which, as it happens, is also one of mine. I surmised that Tim would be too nice to seek vengeance on his own, so I decided to have his back on this score, a gift from one Metal Gear nut to another, Snake style for life.
Yes.
And he says, this song is to be sung by Brett and in the style of the Pokemon theme song from the original series. And here's what I'm going to say. I conferred with our producer, and unfortunately, this is not a review, so it can't be sung. Sorry, that I don't make the rules, but there are rules. This is not Nom.
I don't know. I call. This is a unique situation. I will. I'm not the producer, but I'll let it pass. But this is. I think there's a certain.
If it comes in as a review, I'm happy to revisit this. Okay. I'm just saying, like, the whole point of the singing review is to encourage the review. Like, and you may dispute with me whether it's actually encouraging, but that is the intended purpose. So I will, however, read this as a dramatically rendered poem instead. So it goes, I want to be like Cloud or Squall, or an honorable frog. I know I have to play them all, although it can be a slog. Random battles along the way are a never-ending grind, but worth it to reach the day Tim will have them on his mind. RPGs, it's them and me. They're my final fantasy. RPGs, oh, you're my best friends, and your length I will defend. RPGs, with art so cool. Nobody does stats like you. You'll grind me, and I'll grind you. RPGs, gotta play them all. Let's see, it continues here. Dinging through dirt on a chocobo is my favorite mini game. Chrono Vivi Ayla Robo, how'd you come up with these names? Memorable and always long, your stories drive me wild. But why must Kuja wear a thong? It scars my inner child. RPGs, it's them and me. They're my final fantasy. RPGs, oh, you're my best friends, and your length I will defend. RPGs, with art so cool, nobody does stats like you. You'll grind me, and I'll grind you. JRPGs, gotta play them all. So there you go.
Nice.
There you go. That
good
were
lyrics.
To make its way. Yeah, very good poetry, I would say, in this case. But yeah, very, very nice.
I don't know the Pokemon song that well, but I can kind of imagine.
Well, and that's part of it, is that there's a certain amount of preparation that goes into a singing review where I have to listen to the song if I don't know it a billion times to internalize the song.
But if Blarg were to write back in as a review, you will have to sing it.
That is correct.
That's the way the rules are. So
that's how there are rules.
You wouldn't have to tweak too much to make that possible. So
no, I don't think so. But I'm saying, like, that's the effort we expect. Yeah, that's the minimum bar you get across.
Well, I appreciate Blarg's honor defense that he put out there as one Metal Gear fan to another. Thank you.
And I'm going to read both of the emails this time because this one actually contained. That one, of course, required my dramatic rendition. This one includes a question or questions directed at you primarily. So I thought I should probably read this one as well. So that's why you're getting me on all the emails this week. This is from the Second Quest, who we've heard from many times before. Thanks, Billy. He also, in one of his emails, said there's no singing involved, so hopefully that's an incentive. Since I'm reading it, I'm not sure if that's a disincentive or an incentive. Anyway, he says, it may be a broad question, but I was hoping to better understand the role of a designer in the context of AAA development on a day-to-day or maybe week-to-week would be more applicable scale basis. Having worked on game jam and class projects, I get the role of designer for smaller projects and teams, and I can mostly imagine how that could scale the lead designer positions on larger projects. But when things scale to those larger teams, I find it more difficult to envision what the other people hired as designers are working on during the course of development. Side note, so do I. Unless it's something more specialized and obvious in their title, like a level designer. Are they being assigned to specific systems/mechanics to develop and balance? Rotating through issues identified by the lead as they arise and develop? Or something else? Obviously, even working on, quote, just one system can be a large undertaking depending on what it is and how it ultimately interacts with other systems. But at the same time, it's hard to see how that would entail constant work every day for several years, knowing that a lot of the overall development time is going to be coding/implementation/art and tech, etc. Which would suggest a stop-and-go pattern to the windows of opportunity for a designer to come back in to reassess, adjust, etc. So still not daily work for the dev time. So basically, if you're not the lead calling the shots or a level specialist, what is the actual workload and focus keeping the designer busy for the project's duration? He says, I also realize that specifics may vary from studio to studio depending on their structure. With game design being one of my pursuits, there's an odd disconnect with understanding what my job would be at one scale, but not understanding what it would be at a larger one. So just trying to gain some insight on the subject and figured I'd start by asking the guys who are talking to my ear every week. Billy. So yes, one of us here is a practicing designer and has been for 20 years. Although it probably feels like longer. So what do you do all day, man?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm practicing. It's hard to even say I'm a practicing designer these days.
Right.
Because
fair enough.
Yeah, as a creative director, it becomes even weirder to Billy's question over time and scale. So the thing about his question is, I think he's already hitting upon what a lot of my answer is in the way that he's asking his many questions. One, the sort of crux of his original question of what do you do all day, there is actually an important analysis that needs to happen there in any design team anyway. And what I mean by that is he's on to something if he sees there be a possible situation where a designer may not have enough work. Because that can happen sometimes, and to be honest, then that is that's an issue that needs to be dealt with. Not that the designer is doing a bad job, but that the balancing of the team is not appropriate. And so you do in systems design specifically. I'm kind of taking level design out because he kind of answered that question himself, and I think people can kind of imagine that level designers either have a or multiple levels that they focus on, and that kind of is what occupies their time. So let's just take that one out. But if I focus on systems and mechanics designers, it can be kind of a nuanced sort of job to sort of figure out who needs to work on what when, because basically as you're going through development, systems design roles or systems design responsibilities change over time based on the phase. Pre-production versus prototyping, they can be fairly busy, and then closing, they're fixing bugs, and so it changes. But he's right to have that question because it is a question that is commonly asked and needs to be sort of assessed over time, because there are times when systems designer isn't needed, and if you hopefully have the flexibility in the studio, they can be moved to a different project or what have you. And hopefully get to stay around, etc. But the other part that he sort of has already posited in his questions is scale. Because if you think about a big project like some of the ones that I've had the privilege and terror to work on, just having somebody working on weapons for say a first-person shooter, there is plenty of work there on a large scale game where you have potentially hundreds of weapons to work on. And that's just the construction of those weapons from a data perspective takes a lot of time, let alone the balancing of those, the playtesting of those every day. Working with all the other sub teams takes time. And sort of the unfortunate thing about how large scale teams and large scale games is communication ends up being a huge issue and a huge portion of your time if you're doing it well, because that weapons designer, though he or she is not actually making the model, they're not making the the effects or the audio or anything. They're the ones putting all of that stuff together, and in many cases hold the vision of a specific assault rifle or something. And they're doing probably the data implementation and tuning, but they also have to communicate with all the other departments that are requiring that assault rifle, right? They need to know what the campaign needs from the rifle, what the multiplayer needs, what the enemy designers need. And so that you think that sounds like, oh, we're just going to go, talk to those and let them know. It's like, it's actually a pretty complicated thing on a 600 person team to make sure that everyone is kept up to speed on that stuff. So all that is to say that, yes, there's the hands-on work, but something that I don't think I was the one to say, but I probably got it from somebody. But, every designer to some degree is a bit of a creative director, in that they have to be the one to be the advocate and the communicator to the rest of the team about whatever they're responsible for. So there's actually a lot of work that goes into that isn't even just the hands-on stuff. And like I said, it does depend on the phase of the project, because it does shift over time. But scale...
Yeah, I can imagine even just like, okay, I'm a designer. I've figured out how this, say, assault rifle, like you said. Like, I want to be communicating with all the level designers to sort of explain where I want that, basically where that fits into the story of the design. Not a narrative story in the sense that we normally mean it, but it's sort of like, no, you get this because you've learned these skills, right? And that may not make as much sense with a gun or something like that, but maybe it's some other sort of weapon, or maybe it is. I mean, maybe there's something particular about these guns that you need to know about. They take multiple ammo types or whatever, and we're not going to do that early in the game. This is not right. That's going to start happening at this point, but then we want to phase it out because we want them shifting to these other weapons. And right, there's this whole like a thing around that, and that means talking to every level designer, because the level designers probably, you've got 5 level designers or 10 or 50. I mean, I don't even know for a large team anymore, but like, you've got all these different level designers. You have to go to them and say, okay, here's what I'm thinking with your level, that it might be a good fit for this weapon, right? And here's why, and explain like what kind of enemies it's good against. So now you're also talking with your enemy systems designer, maybe, et cetera, right? And it's just to make that all feel coherent is definitely an advocacy thing, for sure, and is highly communication driven. So
yeah,
to throw it in from my side.
No, and you're right, and you've, I mean, as a programmer, especially as a lead, you're in the sort of same boat, right? You're going to want to talk to those people to figure out what they need and what they want, and why, and even more importantly, why they want this stuff. And actually, I chose sort of the silliest, almost simplest, even though a good assault rifle is definitely hard to make. It's one of the simpler examples. If you imagine like an enemy designer who, again, isn't making the enemy's model or the animations or the audio or the effects, but they are the one to make sure that they bring all of that stuff to life, right? And then that enemy, if you're working in a sort of highly systemic combat game, that enemy is going to be used by lots of people, right? And it's got to work in all of those situations. All the people using it have to understand how to use it. Sometimes you even have enemy designers separate from encounter designers who are responsible for making the encounters in the world be really good, and so they have to be communicating. And then the other good example that is a good complicated example are vehicles, right? Vehicles, if you're a vehicle designer, then how that works impacts level design very heavily, because the vehicles have to use the levels to succeed,
right.
So all this is, I'm just kind of beating the dead horse on when it comes to scale, you definitely don't want too many systems designers, because to his point, there's a point of diminishing returns when it gets too crazy. But when you get to a pretty big scale game, I think you'd be surprised how much work there is to put into systems design in a game that is pretty systemic. And I'll use Halo as an example, because it is, obviously there's a lot of the combat is so systemic in many different ways, and all of that stuff is clashing together that there is a lot of work to be done there, even on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, to speak to the Halo example, I can remember a talk by, and I'm pretty sure this is a Halo talk, an earlier Halo than you worked on, but Jamie Griesmer.
yeah,
Um,
famous talk. Yep.
yeah, about
Tuning the
balancing
sniper
a
rifle.
sniper, tuning the sniper rifle for Halo, maybe 2 or 3 or something like that, but one of the older ones.
I think it was for
And
2.
yeah, it definitely was a ways back, and like how he came to just the particular reload timing. I'm just everything about this sniper rifle, and he talked for an hour about this one gun and how he tuned,
Yeah.
and how he tuned this, why he tuned it the way he tuned it, and based on what data he had to have, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and how he validated it. So there's all of those questions. I mean, there's when you talk about something like bringing all these things together, you're also making sure that satisfies, sort of the vision you have for the gun. Like, this, I mean, these things sound silly, but it's like, well, this lens, not lens flare, muzzle flash, doesn't work with the gun, right? It's too big because it's going to be on all the time, right? It has to be a little smaller, or whatever. Like, I mean, I have no particular example in mind, but it's like you have to be thinking about all of those things as well. Like this can't be as complicated as you've made it, because it's going to be 30 times, a second, or whatever. It's going to be constant, basically. So it needs to be actually kind of simpler and clearer in some way, or whatever. Like, and you have to be evaluating those things and giving feedback to all these things that came into you as well. So you also have to play it, and then recommunicate that back out when it's not, and be clear about why. Like, you have to kind of understand it too, and sometimes that is you're iterating yourself and saying, oh yeah, I thought this would work, and we tried it and it doesn't work. I mean, we had that with the weapons on Republic Commando. Like, the weapons did not work for a long time until suddenly we were like, okay, we're going to really figure out and make the weapons work, all of them, and that was a big project right before we ever showed the game at E3. So
yeah, I think that's why I've always liked. Again, I don't remember if I made it up or if I got it someplace, but that's why I've always liked the concept. And I actually tell designers this, like when they're frustrated communicating with other teams or what have you. It's like, or the common problem is a designer's frustrated because of ego that someone's not listening to them, and the concept that every designer is a type of creative director. I think I like that, because especially because he's asking about AAA games, especially in AAA games today, a vehicle is a very expensive endeavor to create. I don't know. I'm not gonna. I don't even know the numbers, but it's a lot of cash to put a vehicle on screen, and somebody needs to be the vision holder of that. And as he said, when you're at the lead level or creative director level, you're not going to be able to be the one on the ground to be the vision holder for a particular vehicle. You're having to put all the sort of macro pieces together, and so it actually. I think it is a common misconception that a designer is just about the ideas and potentially the implementation, and it's as simple as that. But a designer's job is a vision holder, and there's a lot of sort of soft skills. The best designers I've worked with are the ones that kind of look at it more holistically than just being the one that kind of holds the keys to the kingdom, you know what I mean? And just like, the one that says to do this and not this or whatever, like they're collecting feedback from other people, not just their own feedback, and trying to make the best thing they can. And when you're at a scale of 600 people, you can't have the lead designer or the creative director be doing that kind of stuff. You need everybody to do it. So it does it occupies your day.
Yep. Yeah, you're always out there selling this thing, right? I mean, you're getting buy-in basically on why it's important to introduce this assault rifle in mission 4 and not in mission 3, and then make sure that it's not showing up anymore after mission 11 or whatever. There's a whole, and that's all in the best games, that's all fitting into a much larger whole, because in the best games, the whole thing feels of a piece. Yeah, and that's a huge amount of communication and getting buy-in, as well as buying in, right? So, and and iteration, and purely just like it didn't, it's not working. Why is it not working? And those are a different sort of squishy skill. You need to be able to step back and evaluate. That's why, ideas are not simply enough. I mean, we used to say all the time from focus group testing or whatever that you send in ideas to a focus group test and they're like, make it like whatever the best game is right now, because that's what they're playing and what they want. That is not a design skill. The design skill is looking at a thing and saying, we're doing something new in this way, and here's why, and here's how we communicate it, and just answering question upon question upon question, most of which start with why.
Well, and the ideas for me too, I think that's one side of the idea misconception, but the other side of the idea misconception for me too is that even once you have the idea, the fresh idea, and you have it, in a way, that's the easy part. The hardest part is actually making that into something real that actually is good. You know what I mean? There's the sort of bringing it all together, especially in a big team where, say you have an idea for a great vehicle, this isn't a statistic from Halo or anything, but potentially 10 to 30 people could be involved with making that vehicle come to fruition.
Yeah.
And it's
I totally believe it.
Highly complicated situation. Now, again, that vehicle is reused and used in multiplayer, and it's a highly valuable thing that is worth its money, but it is complicated. So, there's finding the right ideas, but then even once you find them, it doesn't mean you're anywhere near, the home stretch. So, yeah, this whole topic is is its own talk. So I'm just kind of rambling through some answers that came to my mind. I do agree with Brett though. If anyone is an aspiring systems designer, especially weapons designer, that Jamie's talk is a legendary talk and should be watched by, I think it's
we were in that together. I think we were both sitting there watching that, and
we might have been.
I think we were, and I at the time was like, this is an amazing talk. I mean, there have been a few talks at GDC. I mean, there's been a lot of talks where it's like, oh, this is really cool because this is this is somebody I look up to who's been in the industry a long time or whatever, things like that. Those are obvious things that you throw back to. But then there are talks that you're just like, man, this is just an amazing, detailed, practical talk about how to do something that we do. And I've seen a lot of those that I remember. Sometimes they're very hardware focused, they kind of have a limit of how long they're useful, but Jamie's is like an all timer.
It's referenced all the time by especially weapons designers. And then as an inspiration from Jamie's talk, another one I'd recommend, and it's plugging it a bit for a good friend, Ryan Darcy, who was on Halo 5. He was a system designer in charge of essentially the player mechanics. So like all of our Spartan abilities and like all the things and that's a whole nother mire of craziness, because obviously what the player character does impacts literally everybody else, right? How high the jump is, how the thrust works, all this kind of stuff, right? So he's getting it from all sides from as far as criticism. And so that's not everyone uses a sniper rifle, but everyone runs, in the game. And so he actually did a talk because Jamie was definitely one of his inspirations. And so it's not maybe as legendary, but I think he did a great talk. So if you're interested in hearing like a weapon version, and then Ryan did a great job deconstructing Spartan abilities. That's another talk he did at GDC. I'm sure Jamie's is free at this point because
Jamie's is absolutely on the web. I'll put them both in the show notes if I can find them, for sure. Yeah, because they're I mean, you get those talks and they're just really something else. So the other one I really liked was I can't remember his name's, like something Ruskin, I think. He was at Valve. He did the system behind he did the coding system behind the database queries to do voice lines in Left 4 Dead. And it's just one of those talks that's
pretty
just
interesting. Yeah.
Oh, it's brilliant. It was just a brilliant, simple solution to allow just a massive amount of content to be written and make the thing feel super dynamic. And it's one of those classic talks, and there's kind of overlap with design with that one as well. Another practical sort of
and that's
talk.
A great voice line game to study too.
Absolutely. And you look at the system. I mean, that was one where I was sitting in like, God, man, what a talk. So there have been some over the years for sure. Okay, we've been going long. So let's wrap. Thanks for your question, Billy, and thanks for your epic poem, Blarg 42.
No, thank you, Blarg. I appreciate the defense.
The spirited defense. All right, let's turn to the outro stuff. You, of course, you can send us your reviews and your email to devgameclub@gmail.com. If you send us in lyrics and tell me the song in a review, I will sing it. Otherwise, you may just get a dramatic reading. So it's up to you. Only the producer can pull the strings to get Tim to sing, apparently.
There's a power problem here.
You've abdicated all of this power and responsibility.
I just didn't realize how far it would go.
It's a deep rabbit hole. Of course, you can find us on the web at devgameclub.com and on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
I stream on a pretty much daily basis at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. Currently, we are voting on the next game. I'm finishing up Metal Gear Solid 4. The next game is either Epic Mickey or Kirby's Epic Yarn, and it is currently tied.
Whoa.
So, could go either way.
Where are you in Metal Gear?
I have reached the final chapter.
Okay.
I've boarded the GW, or am attacking the GW, or something.
I love it. Oh, jeez.
Anyway, our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. Thanks so much to both of them. Enjoy picking and planting peaches this week, and good night.
Good night.